Hey, Trish here. Thanks for joining me. I'm excited about this lesson today on tulips. And I'm going to show you my process for coming up with a really dynamic composition, because your composition is the foundation of all your work. And if you don't have a great composition, I don't care how good you are, it's going to be boring. So this is not just a lesson to show you how to anatomically, paint a tulip. Is how to put that tulip in a really interesting setting so that maybe people are seeing tulips in a new way. And there are plenty of tulip paintings out there, plenty of floral paintings out there. I do love flowers, but the paintings, they can get boring. So once you've seen a thousand of them. So this is not just about the anatomy of a tulip. It's about the anatomy of a good painting and coming up with a good composition. So, I'm hoping to teach you foundations so that you can then take and do whatever you want, any subject that you want. After this initial explanation of the photography and why I chose what I chose, then I'll put it into warp speed hyperdrive, and you guys can watch me in time lapse. This is pretty, but it would have turned into an anatomical exploration. This one is just too symmetrical. Pretty, but boring. This one, I like it a little bit better. You've got the weird perspective, but still too symmetrical. This one, there's nothing I like about it. This one, sunlight's out. It makes it a lot more interesting. But what's wrong with it is that it's divided up into quadrants. It's right in the middle, too symmetrical. You've got a straight line for the table, straight drapes, that grid of the windows. And I love this one. This one was first runner-up. But I liked this one even better, and I went with it. And this is why. I like how all the angles, all the perspective lines point into the focal point. I love that the tulips are glowing with color. And I love the focal point of that tulip that looks right at the viewer and how it glows. I love how the color, you've got lights and darks, and it's just a beautiful mix of color and light values. So this one won the day, and I think it has a whimsical feel to it. We are not tied to this photograph. I'm going to probably do a lot fewer leaves, pick out some of the more interesting leaf shapes. I'm doing all the tulips, but anyway, I'll change it as I need to in order to make a great composition. I divided it into a grid, just half and half. I've divided it into quadrants. I'm sketching with Vine charcoal. I covered over the burnt sienna wash that I'd originally done for a landscape and put this combination of purple on the outside and alizarin crimson on the inside. You can stop here if you need to copy down or take a photograph of my palette. And now I'm starting to lay in those colors. I love working on these colored backgrounds, and I let some of that background show. That's why it's important to get the right color. I have brushed off the excess of that vine charcoal, and I'm laying in very loosely some of the colors around the tulips in the vase, leaving some of that red showing through. This is really supposed to be whimsical, fun, loose. I realize I've got a bunch of straight lines in there, but the paint is laid on in a real irregular, painterly style so that it has plenty of energy, and then you just tighten up to get those great perspective lines. You can do about anything you want if your structure is good for the painting. And now I'm starting to lay in those tulips. I'm getting a little carried away with the anatomy of them over there. I'd really like for it to be a little bit more loose than that, but I do like it. It shows the curve of the petals, and I love that glow of light from within. Make sure that each blossom has its own personality. They have, different perspectives and different lighting. So don't get caught up in repetition just because it's easy. Really notice what's going on. I love those leaves and the reflected light in there, the backlight. Real quick, I just want to point out something. This is my video setup. So the camera I'm using right now is typically mounted right up there to point down so that you get a really clear view of what I'm doing. When I try to do this at the easel, I find that my head is always in the way somehow. Anyway, there's plenty of videos I haven't even been able to show you because my head was in the way and I didn't know it. So I'm using this setup. Now, it's not as easy for me to paint in this way because instead of being, back here painting, I'm looking down and I'm kind of choked up on my paintbrush. So if you see me where I'm like down here on the paintbrush, it's because I'm kind of at this awkward angle. So you can see it better. And also, I sometimes have to do a grid line to draw it because it's hard for me to draw at such a distorted angle too. And it's kind of close, it's almost too close to me. Whereas if I was painting at the easel, I'd be probably yay far away. So just a little explanation of why I do some of the things I do. And back to the show. I have other lessons that you can look at that talk about that reflected light that's bouncing around and the backlighting versus highlighting. The one on sunflowers, look for that one. And so here I'm just loosely laying in all the flowers and starting to lay in the greenery, having fun with those stems. Some of them, even if they're not at that beautiful curve, that's my artistic license to do that. I know that sometimes tulips look like that, so I chose to put it in here. Now coming into that focal point, making it glow a bit. Now, one thing that's really important is that you balance your contrast, your lights and your darks. That's really getting some good darks in there, and I don't use black. I'm not using black in this. It's not that I never do, but I'm not using any black in this. But I am making sure that I've got some darks in there. One thing I changed up there, that originally was a house, and it didn't make any sense, and it wasn't adding anything to it. I had a roof line there that I think was distracting, so I just went ahead and blurred that out. Now those petals down there are scattered, and I'm putting a little shadow under each one. The shadow is going to ground it, which is important on the glass, so they don't look like they're floating. And in that shadow, you will reflect some of the color of the petal, plus a cool color in there. So I'm kind of doing some of the red and purple mixed, a little bit of blue. I have added some cerulean to that palette to get the blues, some of those warmer blues in the in the window. And of course also that color will then bounce all around in the painting. Laying in some highlights of the light filtering through. I think there was just a lot going on in this that I thought would be a lot of fun to tackle. And I'm just going through, and as I see this, I'm seeing some of my mistakes too. But, just balancing it. It's a lot easier to see your mistakes when you're working on an easel and you can step back. I can't help but get my fingers in there. Trying to get some of the shadows and the curtains and on the wall. Deepening some of the colors. Now that I've hung it on the wall, there's a glaring issue with this not being in perspective, correct perspective. That's one problem with me painting flat. I'm going to come in here and fix that perspective on the base where the base and a tiny bit of that up there is in perspective with the tabletop. Okay? That's why it's really good to get back from your work earlier. Should have done that earlier because that really jumped out at me when I put it up on the wall. Now it's on my easel. I've looked at it on the wall and I've made several adjustments, mainly to the vase. When perspective's off, it just really bothers me. So I have tweaked that a bit, and I've come in and added some reds into that area. Whoa, big thing that I did. Okay, so I noticed that the petals didn't break that plane, and it needed to. Also over here, it didn't break that plane, here. And they just look cut off. So I eliminated some petals in here to make that more clean at the bottom, and then put petals laying further out there. Again, just balancing the composition. Now, one thing I cannot do yet are the final highlights because the paint is just too wet. So you acrylic painters, you can go ahead and add your, glowing warm white. So a touch of yellow to your white and really make some of these areas glow. Look at the original photograph. One thing that really drew me to this photograph was how the insides of the tulips just glowed in the light. I just can't do that yet until it dries a bit more. But I want to go ahead and get this lesson out. So that is just something that I'm going to do once it dries. I would be putting highlights in here, making it glow a little bit more. There's a little detail of one that it lost its petals, so that you're seeing those petals laying down below. That one could stand to glow a bit more, and up in some of these areas. The whites are just too wet and too muddy right now, so that is something that I'll come in and fix. But one of the downsides of oils, you do have to sometimes let things dry before you can, or almost dry before you can totally finish up everything. Also, you'll notice in the photograph that this area right here is a big highlight. So that's going to be, I'll make that glow and pull it up, usually with my finger, pull it up into this area. Thanks so much for joining me. Please like, subscribe. Tell me which area of this painting you like the most. Ask me any questions that you have. Bye.